Zoltan Pozsar says gold is king. Are we about to see a new monetary system? And coming in from Zero Hedge, Zoltan Pozsar warns Russian sanctions threaten dollar's reserve status. Over the weekend, the world gasped in shock when Western powers announced that the nuclear option would be used against Russia in retaliation for its invasion of Ukraine. Sanctions against the country's central bank and targeted expulsions of key banks from SWIFT, a move which has effectively locked Russia out of the Western financial system and left its vast oil export industry, a key lifeline for the Putin regime, in limbo. But the real reason for the shock is that this was the first time the global reserve currency was weaponized against a G20 economy, setting a clear precedent for how the West would and could respond to any other nation that followed in Russia's footsteps, something which China is clearly contemplating via Taiwan. And I think Taiwan would be very, very worried right now, and is carefully studying just how the West responds to Moscow. As a result, and following this week's dramatic freeze of the Russian central bank overseas assets, has prompted some to question just why countries build foreign currency reserves at all, and more broadly, whether the unprecedented Western response to Russia hasn't jeopardized the dollar's reserve status. In what one Washington lawyer described to Reuters as the biggest hammer in the toolshed, G7 and European Union governments blocked certain Russian banks' access to the SWIFT international payment system, and also went a step further than many expected by paralyzing about half the Russian central bank's $630 billion worth of foreign currency and gold reserves. In doing so, the West has undermined Moscow's ability to defend the ruble, which has lost up to a quarter of its value since Friday alone, or even more since then, and recapitalized sanctioned banks as they face nation bank runs. In fact, as some admitted, it was the explicit intention of the West to spark bank runs and to crash the Russian financial system from within. Absolutely, that's exactly why they did what they did. However, as we know, some banks haven't been sanctioned, some Russian banks haven't been sanctioned, and they are still able to use SWIFT. However, we're now seeing people lined up to set up accounts with Chinese banks, and interesting. While a huge blow for Russia's economy, Reuters' Mike Dolan wrote that the move quickly prompted questions about whether targeting reserve holdings as an act of economic warfare may prompt a rethink by reserve managers across the globe, not least in countries that may be at loggerheads or face a potential conflict with US or EU governments over where to bank their national stash. It's a potentially huge issue for world markets, given that central bank foreign reserves, currency reserves, totaled a record of $12.83 trillion late last year, a rise of $11 trillion over the last 20 years. This money, some say currency, I do, is held mostly in US and European government bills and bonds, with the US dollar still accounting for almost 60% of that, and the euro about 20%. To be sure, Russia has long been aware of the potential risk involved in holding dollars as reserves, and since the annexation of Crimea in 2014, Russia's central bank had steadily divested its reserves of most US dollar assets, but the dollar, euro, and sterling still account for more than 50% of its holdings, located in France, Germany, Japan, Britain, the United States, Canada, and Australia. And you can see from this chart that on the right-hand side, you can see that the monetary gold, 21.7%, and the Chinese holdings there, what's that, 13.8%. So they have got quite a bit of reserves that, well, the rest of the world cannot touch. With Moscow and Beijing increasingly allied on the geopolitical stage and China refusing to either condemn the Ukraine invasion or join Western sanctions, China's yuan, currently accounting for just 2.7% of world reserves, may be one clear option for anxious reserve managers in Moscow or elsewhere. Also, I've noticed that there's some pressure on India and some diplomats trying to ramp up pressure to now put sanctions on India because India refused to sanction or critique Russia. And, well, we know why that's the case. And once again, this could backfire. In fact, I think it's going to backfire when you use a dollar like this against trading partners. They go, maybe we need to rethink how we hold our FX reserves. Anyway, let's continue. Of course, China itself, for all its fraught relationships with the West, has been the biggest reserve stockpiler since it joined the global trading system 20 years ago, amid tight control of its exchange rate. More than 3 trillion of its 3.22 trillion hoard was amassed since 2000, precisely to offset foreign inflows to keep a lid on the yuan. But is that about to change, and did Western sanctions against Russia mark the beginning of the end of the dollar as the world's reserve currency? Well, Berkeley professor and expert on world reserve management, Barry Eichengreen, reckons that of the two imperatives behind reserve stockpiling, to intervene or stabilize domestic markets or as a war chest against shocks, disasters, or balance of payments crisis, the latter may now be in question. The main effect may be declining demand for reserves, he said. If countries see reserves and foreign exchange management as less useful and available, then they'll have to accept the inevitability of that their exchange rates are likely to move by more. In which case, they need harden their financial systems and economies against exchange rate related disruptions, for example, by discouraging corporates from borrowing in foreign currency. That in itself could have a profound impact on world markets and on the model for emerging markets and developing economies. Even more alarming take comes from former Goldman economist Jim O'Neill, who said the Western sanctions could ultimately lead to major reform of the global system. Amongst the fallout, some countries may see less need to accumulate FX reserves, he said, adding that could indeed seed peak reserves worldwide. It might also make some of the bigger emerging markets think more seriously about reform and opening up their domestic markets, liberalizing and moving away from the US-centric system. But the most surprising take comes from former New York Fed staffer, current repo guru and Credit Suisse money market guru, Zoltan Pozsar, who on any other day would be a stalwart advocate of the status quo, and who ominously said that the response to Russia may have set off a sequence of events in motion that eventually leads to the demise of the dollar as a reserve currency. Speaking to Bloomberg, Pozsar, who this weekend warned that the lockout of Russia from the global financial system could prompt central banks to aggressively pump liquidity to stabilize markets, noted that wars tend to turn into major junctures for global currencies, and with Russia losing access to its foreign currency reserves, a message has been sent to all countries that they can't count on these money stashes to actually be theirs in the event of tension. As such, he echoes the opinions voiced above that it may make less and less sense for global reserve managers to hold dollars for safety, as they could be taken away right when they're needed most. Of course, Russia wasn't the first country to learn the hard way that the dollar reserves can be weaponized at a moment's notice. Last year, the Biden administration's move to seize Afghanistan's cash assets and confiscate the country's gold held at the New York Fed to prevent access by the Taliban was another such signal that reserves can be frozen. Pozsar, similar to O'Neill, argues that this recognition will encourage central banks to diversify from the dollar or try to re-anchor their currencies to assets that are less susceptible to influence from US and European governments. As such, recent tensions could usher in a new monetary order in which countries are far less interconnected through international bank accounts and reserves. Speaking to the Odd Lots podcast, Pozsar said that most FX reserves that exist in the world today are all forms of inside money, i.e. they are liabilities of someone else. As a quick reminder, and as we explained over the weekend, central bank deposits, and securities are all inside money. Money and money-like claims that are someone else's liability. And it's situations like this when outside money or money claims like gold bullion that are no one's liability. What have we been saying on this channel for, well, since I started this channel? Anyway, what does he say? Money claims like gold bullion that are no one's liability is king. So gold bullion is king, he's saying. This is Mr. Repo Man himself. Especially if stored in vaults domestically. Unlike balances at the Deutsche Bundesbank, Western G-SIBs or Euroclear, you control what you have. Echoing what he said over the weekend, Pozsar told Bloomberg that whether you hold the sovereign debt of a country or you keep a deposit at a central bank of a foreign country, or if you keep deposits at Western financial institutions, these are all forms of inside money that you don't control. Someone owes it to you, and these things can be sanctioned. What have we been saying on this channel? If a central bank is in a situation like this, and the currency is under pressure, would it ever come to having to re-anchor your currency to something like gold? I think these are all questions that should be top of mind, he added, forgetting to mention Bitcoin and other cryptos, which an entire generation now views as digital gold. Well, they're not digital gold, and I'm not going to go down that route in this video. I don't know if it'll come to that, but if things get worse, you could basically re-anchor the ruble to a pile of gold because you need an anchor in situations like this, he said, echoing what we have said for years, namely that in case Russia wanted to truly extricate itself from the current dollar reserve world, it should unveil a gold-backed currency. A gold-backed currency. Now, where have we heard this? Oh, I did a video on this last week. Russian crisis to push gold to 100K. In this video, I shared what Luke Groman was saying on Twitter, arguing and putting out there about how Russia can get around these sanctions and how they can use their oil and gas, their commodity exports for gold, and how there could be a big squeeze on gold. If you guys haven't watched this video, I recommend you do. I'll put a link in the description below, and at the end of this video, I'll put a link where you can just click on it and watch this video. Others also share this dismal view. A few days ago, former associate general strategist Dylan Grice, who since founded Calderwood Capital, described the recent moves as a weaponization of money. You only get to play the card once, he tweeted. China will make it a priority to need no US dollars before going for Taiwan. It's a turning point in monetary history. Absolutely, absolutely. And it's not just China. I think we're going to see the Middle East. I think we're going to see India, Pakistan, a lot of African nations. I think a lot of people have seen what has happened, and they're going to make some big changes in terms of their reserves and in terms of their trade, and that is going to have a big impact on the US dollar. It's going to have a big impact on Western society. A similar warning was issued by Stephen Englander, former city head of FX and current managing director at Standard Chartered Bank. It's a very long-term thing, so nothing immediate or even say on a 2 to 3 year basis. But if what we are seeing is a demonstration of the power of economic and financial force, the logical response, if there is a risk that you will be on the receiving end, is to see what you can do to immunize yourself, he said. Weirdly enough, there may be a second response. What essentially is your potential economic foe importing from you, and what can you do to have the maximum impact on their economy and least on yours? Of course, none of this is a surprise to Russia, which has been feverishly rotating out of its inside money dollar reserves, including dumping all of its US treasuries in 2018, according to official data, and amassing a record stockpile of gold in the process. And what have I been reporting on this channel for the last 18 months? That Russia have been de-dollarizing. They've been increasing their gold holdings. Blind Freddy could have seen what was happening. In fact, as Pozsar noted over the weekend, the Bank of Russia now has more gold than deposits at foreign central banks. Another former Citi strategist, Brent Donnelly, who now runs Spectrum Markets, agreed with Pozsar. In a cooperative game, more global trade and the accumulation of FX reserves makes sense. But in a competitive game, where your currency holdings are issued by an adversary and can be frozen or vaporized at that adversary's discretion, global trade and the accumulation of FX reserves makes less sense. But while a growing number of countries, especially those that remain ideologically aligned with Russia like China and India, may seek to quietly and not so quietly rotate out of the dollar, they face another problem. They'll need to convert those trillions of dollars into something, and for now the pool of potential suitable assets remains limited. Then again, if one wishes to avoid the fiat system entirely, since within the system every single asset is someone else's liability and vice versa, one would need to seek refuge outside, i.e. in non-fiat assets. Gold and silver, baby. Here, gold is the most obvious candidate, although as Bloomberg notes, there's only so much of it available, which of course is a narrow view. After all that would need to happen is for gold to be revalued to make it worth far more. Hello? What have I been saying? Not just this video, but I've done other videos where Luke Groman's talking about revaluing gold to 40,000 to get the debt to GDP under blah, 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 blah. I've been banging on about this for how long now? But no, I'm a conspiracy theory. Woo! Incidentally, it was none other than a PIMCO economic, I think it meant economist, who back in 2016 suggested that in order to save the economy and devalue the dollar, the Fed should buy gold. Oh, man. This is so frustrating. Failing that, the US government can just confiscate all the existing physical gold and devalue the dollar against it, similar to what FDR did with the infamous Executive Order 6102. So will the Fed start buying gold in the open market? We doubt it, but just as attention is now turning to regulating, banning cryptos to avoid Russian oligarchs from using it to bypass sanctions, it stands to reason that the next trigger point, as the fiat system continues along its relentless path to terminal disintegration, will be a confiscation of all precious metals. It's only a matter of time. Oh, really? So I did this video late last year, so only a few months ago. CBDC warning, gold and silver ban, question mark. Now, if you think that we're going to see gold being confiscated again, I'll put a link in the description to this video. Go watch it, because I argue in this video that no, it's not going to happen. And I explain why, and why today is different to 1933-34. Back then, we were under a gold standard. Back then, the people owned the gold. Now, it's what, 9 or 10% of people own gold. People don't own the gold. Central banks own gold. I mean, I guess if they really wanted to do something, I guess they could nationalize the miners and then take the gold from the mine. But people don't own gold like they used to. Anyway, I'll put a link in the description to this video, and you can see my arguments as to why I don't believe precious metals will be confiscated. And by the way, if they do, what was the number? Someone fact-checked me, but I think it was something like, it was single digits anyway, % of people actually handed back their gold in 1934. So, yeah. And here, Russia to return to the gold standard. Well, the government will abolish the VAT or tax on bullion. This bill will go to the State Duma on March 4. Going forward, when purchasing gold bars or other precious metals from a bank, the 20% current tax on top of its value will not apply. This is a way to ensure people can invest securely in something other than the dollar. Usually people hold their cash in dollars as the ruble is volatile. So as I'm recording this on Sunday, the 6th of March, here in Australia, we have a look at the gold chart. 1970, looking very nice. I think the gold price is positioned very nicely for a very big move upward. And silver at 25.67 also I think is looking very nice for a big move up towards that $30 mark. So that's obviously, you know, we need to get above that $28, $29 mark and hit 30. But I definitely think that's we can hit that very, very soon, a lot sooner than most people think. When we look at WTI crude oil, $115 a barrel. You know, I've heard a lot of analysts say that with oil at around $120 a barrel, Europe and the US, well, I guess you'd say that the globe goes into recession. So you know, we're right on that. And it's interesting that I shared in a video, I think around October last year, where I made a $2 million profit on a trade with Peabody, and at that time I had sold that and moved into oil producers, refiners, and exploration companies, and I got in pretty cheap, and I shared details on those stocks in that video. Well, I can tell you between my buy price there and what they are now, they have gone up on multiples. And here, Brent oil, you know, almost $120 a barrel. So we're going to feel this in the at the pump when we fill up our cars. We're already seeing it, but I think it's going to get worse. I think it's going to get a lot worse. And look, if Russia were to turn off the taps, and you know, it's obviously going to hurt themselves, but you know, there's a lot of analysts talking about $150 oil. Have a look at the latest Barron's front cover. They're saying $150 oil. Well, if Russia were to turn off the taps, I'm telling you, $200 oil is not out of the question. No, I don't think that's likely. I hope it's not. It's not what I'm predicting on this channel, put it that way. But I wouldn't completely rule it out either. So I know it's pretty extreme. I wouldn't rule it out. I'll give it a very low probability, but don't rule it out. This is an unbelievable chart. UK natural gas. Look at that, 486. Wow. 26%. Wow. Wow. I'm speechless. And here, EU natural gas. This is wow. Wow. If this isn't going to hurt Europe and hurt the West, you know, we are kidding ourselves. And here's a chart of coal. Insane. And yes, I've sold out of my Peabody shares, but I still own 4 other coal stocks. In fact, one of my coal stocks, and I've shared this in so many videos, I bought one coal stock at 1.8 times earnings. You know, I mean, they're just giving the company away. But another coal stock that I bought, I'm about to be paid a 58% dividend. You heard that right, I'm not joking. 58% dividend based on my buy price. So I'm going to receive half my capital back that I put into buying the stock in a dividend. And I've only owned that stock for a bit over a year. Yeah, a bit over a year. Maybe 16, 17, 18 months, maybe. Or actually, maybe longer, whatever. Yeah, just insane. Insane. And here's a chart of wheat. This is wheat. This is hyperinflation, wheat, food. We got a lot of problems coming. Jessica Nutt. So Ukraine, Belarus, Russia share of global exports. Fertilizer, 35%. Urea, which is fertilizer, 15%. Wheat, 25%. Barley, 24%. Corn, 13%. World is about to become very hungry. We got big problems. And from Peter, Russian precious metals production, 40% of palladium, 12.5% silver, 10% gold, and 10% platinum. Squeeze? Anyone feel a squeeze coming on? So we started this video with Zoltan. Let's finish with it with him with this tweet. If you believe that the West can craft sanctions that maximize pain for Russia while minimizing financial stability risks in the West, you could also believe in unicorns. Anyway, guys, if you like this video, please hit that like button. Love to see your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, do so and hit that notification bell so you get all of our videos when we upload them. Anyway, guys, take care, and I'll see you all again on another episode of Finance Uncut.